My daughter said I wasn't invited to my grandson's wedding. She said everyone insisted. I said, understood, and quietly froze the trust they were counting on. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you how everything unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sam Roy from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I've never been the kind of man who demanded gratitude. I'm not built that way. I was raised on the kind of pride that settles into your bones when your hands are calloused, your word is solid, and your name means something in town. I ran a construction business for almost 40 years. Poured foundations in winter, framed houses in the July heat, and got to know every nail and screw like family. But my real legacy wasn't the buildings. It was Melanie, my daughter. She came into the world with her mother's eyes and my stubborn streak, and after Helen died when Melanie was just 12, I raised her on my own. Every scraped knee, every bad grade, every broken heart, I was there. Not perfect, never soft, but steady, always steady. By the time I retired, I had enough put away to live comfortably and still help out where I could. I didn't drive a fancy truck. I didn't take cruises or play golf. My joy came from seeing Melanie and Evan, my grandson, move forward in life. Evan was a good kid. Smart, kind, respectful in the way boys aren't often taught to be anymore. I helped pay for his first car, co-signed his college loans, even taught him how to hang drywall when he and his friends tried converting the basement into a studio. He used to call me Gramps, always with a grin, like I was a secret he was proud to share. Those little moments, they were everything. They made the ache of missing Helen just a little easier to carry. When Evan got engaged last fall, I started thinking about the future in a different way. I didn't want to just buy them a toaster or write a check for the caterer. I wanted to do something that would last. So I met with my lawyer and set up a trust, enough for a solid down payment on a house and a real honeymoon, the kind you take when you're young and still believe the world owes you something sweet. I didn't tell Melanie or Evan. I wanted it to be a surprise, a gesture that said, your family believes in you. Because that's what I thought we were, a family. Not perfect, but still knitted together by time and effort and shared history. I remember sitting in my kitchen one morning, sipping my black coffee, when Melanie called. Her voice was tight, polite in that brittle way she gets when she's about to say something she knows will hurt. Dad, she said, I need to talk to you about the wedding. I smiled, assuming she wanted me to give a toast or help pick the venue. Sure, I said. What's up? There was a pause, long, awkward. Then she cleared her throat and said, we've decided it's probably best if you don't come. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Come again. It's just Evan's fiancée and her parents. They think it might be easier. Less complicated. You know how you can be sometimes. I stared at the wall above the kitchen sink, the one with the little photo of Evan at 6 years old, holding a hammer next to a crooked birdhouse we'd built together. I couldn't even feel my coffee mug in my hand. Understood, I said. That's all. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just hung up and sat there in the quiet, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. That night, I went down to the basement, unlocked the old filing cabinet, and pulled out the trust papers. I flipped through the pages, then called my lawyer and told him to freeze the account. No explanations, just instructions. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just did what I've always done. Made the necessary adjustment. If they didn't want me at the wedding, they didn't need my help building a future. Simple as that. At least, that's what I told myself. But the truth? It didn't feel simple. It felt like a betrayal wrapped in a smile. I had spent decades showing up, doing the hard things, making sure my daughter and grandson never felt the kind of emptiness I'd had growing up. And in one phone call, I learned where I truly stood, not as family, but as furniture. Useful until inconvenient. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the back porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the stars blink out one by one. The air was cold, and my bones ached, but I stayed out there anyway, because I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't patch or rebuild. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to try. I didn't tell anyone what Melanie had said. Not my friends from the hardware store, not the old crew I still grab coffee with once a month, and certainly not the neighbors who always asked about the wedding every time I checked the mail. I let them talk, let them assume I'd be there, front row, smiling like any proud grandfather would. Let them think I was picking out a suit, booking a hotel, maybe rehearsing a toast. I nodded politely and gave nothing away. Because what was there to say? That my own daughter had disinvited me from my grandson's wedding like I was an embarrassing uncle with a drinking problem? That I had become an afterthought in a story I helped build from the ground up? No, I couldn't speak it aloud. To say it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that, not yet. The days crawled by, each one sharpening the weight of her words. You know how you can be sometimes. What did that even mean? Too opinionated? Too blunt? Too unwilling to pretend I liked every decision they made? I never raised my voice at Evan. I never criticized his fiancée, even when Melanie told me in hushed tones about her controlling parents and extravagant taste. I bit my tongue when Evan dropped out of grad school and took a job that barely paid. I supported him. I showed up. I was steady. But I suppose steadiness isn't fashionable anymore. Maybe it's just easier to push aside the man who doesn't fit into your carefully curated life, the one who reminds you of the messy parts you'd rather forget. I thought about calling her back. I rehearsed it in my head dozens of times. In some versions, I confronted her. In others, I played the hurt father trying to understand. But in every version, I heard her same calm, condescending tone, like she was the adult and I was a stubborn child who didn't know what was best. I couldn't stomach it. So instead, I stayed silent. I focused on work. Not the paid kind, but the kind that kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. I refinished the deck, replaced the gutters, reorganized the garage. Anything to avoid sitting still with my own disappointment. When the wedding week arrived, I felt it like a change in the weather. The house grew colder even though the sun was out. The silence got heavier, more pointed. The day before the ceremony, Melanie posted a photo online of her in a pale blue dress, standing beside Evan in his suit. They looked happy, radiant, as if there was no missing piece, no shadow behind the smiles. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to find some clue that they regretted leaving me out. There wasn't one. If anything, they looked relieved. The wedding day came, and I spent it alone. Not accidentally, not in a fit of moping, but deliberately. I made a big breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, the works. I sat at the table, poured my coffee, and didn't check my phone. Around noon, I went out to the shed and started sanding an old rocking chair I'd meant to fix for years. I lost track of time. The rhythm of the work, the hum of the sander, the smell of sawdust, it drowned out the pain in a way nothing else could. I didn't think about Evan saying his vows, or Melanie giving a toast, or the family dancing and drinking while I sat in silence. I just worked. Because work was the one thing that never let me down. Later that evening, I grilled a steak, poured a glass of scotch, and sat on the back porch watching the sky turn orange and then violet. No one called. No one texted. And the emptiness I'd feared didn't swallow me whole. It sat beside me, quiet and respectful, like an old friend who knew better than to speak. I thought of Helen. What she'd say if she could see this mess. She'd be angry. She always said I gave too much without asking for anything in return. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was my fatal flaw, loving my family without terms, without conditions, and believing that would always be enough. The next morning, I packed up the wedding gift I had already bought, a custom watch with Evan's initials and the date engraved on the back. I'd meant to give it to him during the rehearsal dinner, something sentimental to mark the moment. Instead, I put it in the back of the closet, behind old photo albums and tax documents. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I knew I'd never hand it to him either. That moment had passed, and with it, something in me had quietly snapped. Not in anger, not in spite, but in understanding. Understanding is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it comes like a slow leak, unnoticed until the floorboards rot. And by the time you finally smell the mildew, the damage is already done. That's how it felt. Like I'd been living with a quiet betrayal for years, and only now could I see it for what it was. The way Melanie stopped asking for my opinion. The way Evan gradually visited less. The polite but distant holiday calls. The signs were there. I just didn't want to believe them. I closed the trust account that Monday. Called the lawyer, confirmed the freeze, and instructed him to send me all the documentation. I wanted it done. Final. No room for confusion. When he asked if I needed help explaining it to the family, I laughed, short, bitter. They explained everything already, I said. They don't want me involved. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was resolve. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending the people you love are incapable of hurting you. I wasn't angry. I was awake. The days after the wedding felt strange, not painful in the way I'd expected, but vacant, like walking through a house after it's been emptied. Everything was still there, the photos on the wall, the smell of old leather in my recliner, the ticking of the clock on the mantel. But something had hollowed out beneath the surface. I didn't hear from Melanie. Not a thank you, not a follow-up, not even a leftover cupcake or a courtesy call to say the day went well. It was as if I'd been erased cleanly, surgically, with no trace left behind. I kept waiting for the hurt to swell into anger, something loud and sharp that would justify what I'd done. But all I felt was a quiet finality, like the last page of a book I didn't know I'd been writing. I tried to go about my routines. Every morning, I'd walk down to the diner on Main Street, where I'd been having breakfast with the same handful of retired men for the better part of 10 years. We talked about the usual, politics, baseball, the new development project that was ruining the North Side. They all asked about the wedding. So how'd it go, Bobby? Did you cry when the boy said I do? One of them joked. I just smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and shrugged. Didn't make it, I said flatly. The silence that followed was thick. No one pushed. A few exchanged looks, but the conversation drifted elsewhere. They didn't ask again. At home, the silence pressed harder. The trust papers were filed away, officially frozen, no longer accessible without my signature. I'd made it clear that nothing was to be dispersed unless I gave a written release, which I had no intention of doing. The lawyer, Mr. Forrester, called once to double-check. Just confirming you're holding your position? He asked carefully, like he was trying not to offend me. I'm confirming they held theirs, I replied, and that was the end of it. The photos started rolling in that week, online albums, tagged pictures, smiling faces in 100 different poses. Evan in a sharp navy suit. His bride, Eliza, in a gown that looked like it cost more than my first house. Melanie between them, beaming, holding a bouquet like she was the mother of the year. I studied her face the way I used to read blueprints, looking for cracks, inconsistencies, weak framing. But she looked happy, untroubled. My absence hadn't cast even a faint shadow across her expression. There was one photo that caught me off guard. Evan standing with Eliza's parents, arms around them, the caption reading, "Surrounded by love." I stared at that one for a long time. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a mention. A toast in my honor. A photo caption that said, "Missing you, Gramps." Something small. Some acknowledgement that I wasn't just a forgotten name on a family tree. But there was nothing. The digital world had swallowed the event and spit it back out like I'd never existed. I logged off after that. Deleted the apps from my phone. I didn't need reminders of where I didn't belong. That weekend, I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photographs, letters, a few keepsakes from Melanie's childhood. Her first report card, a crayon drawing of our old house, a pressed corsage from her prom. I kept it all. Every memory, every milestone. I ran my fingers over the paper, the fragile lines of her handwriting, and felt something crack deep in my chest. I wasn't just mourning my exclusion from the wedding. I was grieving the idea that all those years of love and labor had faded into nothing more than distant gratitude, the kind you express once a year in a Christmas card. I thought about Helen. She would have hated all of this. She had a fire in her, one that never let injustice slide. I could almost hear her voice in my head. Don't let them walk all over you, Robert. You matter. Your presence matters. But she wasn't here, and I was tired of arguing with ghosts. I boxed everything up, photos, drawings, old school projects, and carried the box to the attic. I didn't want to throw them away. I wasn't that cold. But I couldn't keep tripping over the past like it still belonged in the present. I needed space to breathe, to understand what came next, to rebuild the version of myself that didn't orbit around a family that no longer saw me as essential. That Sunday, I drove out to the country. There's a lake about 40 miles north where Helen and I used to camp with Melanie when she was a kid. I hadn't been back in years. I brought a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a notebook. I sat by the water for hours, watching the sunlight scatter across the ripples. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that didn't feel like punishment. I wrote a letter to Evan, not to send, just to say what I needed to say. I told him I loved him, that I always had. But love without respect wasn't love, it was leverage. And I was done being leveraged. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. That's a myth. But clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly sad anymore. I was simply done pretending. Done giving without boundaries. Done waiting for recognition that would never come. I folded the letter, placed it in the notebook, and drove home in silence. The celebration was over. I hadn't been part of it, but I'd lived through it. Alone, yes, but awake. And that counted for something. It was exactly 8 days after the wedding when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Most calls that early on a Monday came from telemarketers or automated pharmacy reminders, and I wasn't in the mood for either. But something about the number, a vaguely familiar area code, made me pick up. Dad? Melanie's voice slipped through the speaker, thin and hesitant, like it was testing the temperature before diving in. I said nothing at first. Just let her sit in the silence she'd carved. She inhaled sharply. I need to talk to you. Please. Her tone was different this time. Not polished. Not rehearsed. There was a tremble in it, an edge I hadn't heard in years. I leaned back in my chair, one hand still on the coffee mug I hadn't touched. Go ahead, I said, my voice flat as a concrete slab. There was another pause. I didn't want to leave you out, she blurted. That wasn't just me. It wasn't even mostly me. Evan and Eliza's family, there were concerns. They thought it might be better this way. She rushed her words like someone racing ahead of consequences. They were afraid there might be tension. You know how you can be when she stopped herself. They just didn't want any distractions. I let that sit between us for a moment. So I was a distraction. I didn't phrase it as a question. I knew the answer already. But hearing it out loud, hearing her try to spin it into something noble or strategic, made it settle deeper in my bones. Melanie exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated that I wasn't making this easier for her. No, Dad. It's not about you being a distraction. It's about keeping things smooth. Weddings are delicate, and I'm messy. I finished for her. A complication. An embarrassment. That's not what I said. She shot back, sharper now. I didn't want it to be like this. I tried to push back, but Evan said, she stopped again, as if realizing how little power she actually had in that conversation. They just thought it'd be better without tension. I laughed thin, not a joyful laugh, but something dry and gutted. You mean better without me? Her voice broke. Dad, please don't do this. Evan didn't mean to hurt you. He's just young. He didn't understand what it would feel like for you. But he knows now. We all do. Especially after we found out about the trust. There it was. The reason she called. Melanie paused, waiting for me to respond. I didn't. I took another sip of coffee, cold now, and let her stew in the silence. She pressed on. I didn't even know you had something like that set up. Why wouldn't you tell us? Because I wanted it to be a gift, I said, slow and deliberate. Not a transaction. Not a payment for being tolerated. A gift from a grandfather who thought he was part of something. We made a mistake, she said quickly. A huge one. But freezing the trust? Is that really fair? It's Evan's future. He's just starting out. I closed my eyes. So was I murmured. When I married your mother, we had nothing but a used car and a couch we found on the side of the road. No handouts. No trust funds. Just sweat and hope. My voice hardened. You think I did all this so Evan could inherit it without looking me in the eye on his wedding day? Dad, no. I cut in. Let me finish. I spent years, decades, trying to make sure you and Evan had more than I ever did. I missed holidays on job sites. I gave up vacations so I could pay for your braces, your car, your tuition. I was there for every emergency, every favor, every time you called. And all I asked in return was a seat at the damn table. I could hear her breathing shift, the weight of my words finally sinking in. You don't know what it felt like, I continued, my voice shaking despite how calm I tried to sound. To open my phone and see strangers in my place. To see your face lit up next to people who barely know him, while I sat here like a ghost. I swallowed hard. So no, Melanie, I'm not unfreezing the trust. Not now. Maybe not ever. But Dad, we need it. We put a deposit on a house. You made plans without me. Keep making them. She fell silent again. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of her breath and the quiet tick of the wall clock. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. So this is it. You're just cutting us off. I looked out the window. The sun had just started to rise, casting light across the yard where Evan used to kick a soccer ball back and forth. No, I said. You already did that. I'm just catching up. Her voice cracked again, but I didn't wait to hear what came next. I ended the call, set the phone down, and stared at it like it might ring again and undo the last few minutes. But it didn't. And I didn't want it to. I stood up, walked to the back door, and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up from the inside. I breathed it in slowly, like it could scrub the residue of that conversation from my lungs. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clear. For the first time in years, I understood exactly where I stood in their lives, somewhere behind convenience, beneath appearance, but far enough from their priorities that I could finally stop pretending. The silence that followed that call was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Melanie didn't call back. Evan didn't reach out. For a few days, it felt like I'd dropped a stone into a well and was waiting to hear the splash, but nothing came. No ripples. No echoes. Just quiet. At first, I thought maybe they were regrouping, trying to figure out their next move. Then I thought maybe I'd finally said something that stuck, that forced them to sit with the weight of what they'd done. But by the end of the week, when the silence still held, I began to realize the truth. They didn't know how to talk to me anymore unless they were getting something from me. Then the letters started. The first was a polite but firm note from a family attorney I didn't recognize, some associate with a hyphenated last name who'd probably never worn work boots in his life. The letter wasn't hostile, but it was slippery, filled with phrases like previous expectations and verbal commitments and potential recourse. It read more like a warning shot than a conversation. They wanted clarification on the trust, what the terms were, whether there had been any prior indication that the funds would be available before or after the wedding, whether my decision to freeze it was reactionary or premeditated. I laughed when I read that line. Reactionary or premeditated. As if there were only two kinds of choices in this world. They didn't understand that what I'd done wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about preservation. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a long email from Evan. It started with the usual pleasantries. Hey Gramps, hope you're doing okay. As if we were just catching up after a vacation. But quickly, the tone shifted. He explained how the house they'd put a deposit on was now at risk. How the honeymoon had been scaled back already. How they'd counted on the trust. Even if I hadn't told them about it, they'd heard things, and it had become part of their plan. He never apologized for the wedding. Not directly. He said things like, sorry you felt hurt, and it wasn't personal, which is just another way of saying, we knew it would hurt, we just didn't care enough not to. I read his email twice, then deleted it. Not out of spite, but because I knew answering it would only lead to more of the same. More gaslighting. More attempts to smooth things over just enough to get what they wanted. I wasn't going to be the family ATM anymore. I wasn't going to let my legacy be reduced to a dollar sign attached to their convenience. Word started to spread among the rest of the family. My sister called, her voice cautious. Robert, honey. I heard there was some tension after the wedding. I could tell she was fishing, trying to play mediator. I gave her the short version, uninvited, trust frozen, no contact since. She sighed and tried to play devil's advocate. You know how kids are these days. They get overwhelmed. They don't always think things through. They thought it through enough to hire a lawyer, I said dryly. That shut her up for a moment. Soon after, a cousin I hadn't seen in years sent me a Facebook message. Hey, just wondering what's going on with Melanie and Evan. They seem really upset. Is there something I should know? I didn't respond. What was the point? Everyone suddenly wanted the inside scoop. but no one had asked about me in years. Now that I was the obstacle in someone else's story, I had their full attention. One afternoon, I was out in the yard trimming hedges when a car pulled into the driveway. Melanie. She got out slowly, dressed in one of those designer jackets she used to mock in her 20s when we shopped at outlet stores. She looked tired, brittle, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. She walked up to me cautiously, like I was a dog she wasn't sure would bite. "Dad," she said, "can we talk?" I didn't invite her inside. I set down my clippers, wiped my hands on my jeans, and nodded toward the porch swing. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I came to try to fix this." I looked at her, really looked at her. The girl I'd raised was still in there somewhere, beneath the years and the distance in the calculated silences. But I wasn't sure I trusted that version of her anymore. "I'm listening," I said. She launched into her speech. How Evan was struggling, how they felt blindsided, how she never meant for things to unravel like this. But the more she talked, the more it sounded like a negotiation. She mentioned the trust only once, but it was always there, under every sentence. I could feel it, the quiet expectation that this conversation would end with me relenting. When she finally stopped, I spoke slowly, choosing my words like I was laying bricks. "I didn't do this to hurt you," I said. "I did it because I needed to reclaim something. You made it clear I wasn't part of your life in the way I thought I was. That's your right. But it's also my right to respond to that with boundaries. I'm not here to bankroll people who only see my value in financial terms." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. I'd spent too long biting my tongue, too long trying to keep peace that was never mutual. She stood up. "So you're just done with us?" "No," I said, rising too. "I'm just done pretending." She didn't hug me goodbye. She didn't say she loved me. She walked back to her car and drove off without looking back. And I watched her go, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The family had put me on trial. And for once in my life, I'd chosen to defend myself. The thing about drawing a boundary is that it doesn't make the pain disappear, it just gives it somewhere to stop. In the weeks after Melanie left my porch without a hug, without a goodbye, the quiet in the house didn't feel triumphant. It felt honest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't covering hurt with charity or stitching over rejection with generosity. I was letting the wounds stay visible, not to punish anyone, but to remind myself that I mattered too. I mattered outside of what I gave. I mattered even when I wasn't needed. Life didn't change in any dramatic way after that. The mail still came. The coffee still brewed every morning. The sun still rolled up over the backyard like it always had. But inside, something had shifted. I began making small changes, ones that wouldn't have meant much to anyone else but felt seismic to me. I took the wedding invitation, still sealed, unopened, the one they eventually sent after the fact, probably as a formality, and I burned it in the fire pit out back. No anger, no ceremony. Just a quiet goodbye to the version of myself that waited for inclusion. That man was gone now. Instead of reviewing trust documents or listening for my phone to ring with apologies, I started giving my time to other places. I signed up to volunteer at a local nonprofit that built housing for displaced veterans. The smell of sawdust and the weight of tools in my hands felt like coming home. These were men who'd been forgotten by their own systems, men who didn't ask for pity but appreciated presence. I'd show up with my tool belt, help frame walls, or pour concrete, and when we broke for lunch, they treated me like one of them. No questions about weddings. No judgment. Just quiet respect. I also started putting real time into the motorcycle I'd stored in the garage since Melanie was a teenager. It was a '78 Honda I'd bought at an auction years ago, always intending to restore it. Somehow life got in the way, raising her, running the business, helping Evan. But now, with space in my life and clarity in my heart, I found myself drawn to it again. I cleaned the carburetor, rebuilt the engine, ordered parts online with the kind of anticipation I hadn't felt in decades. That machine became a metaphor in motion. All the parts were still there, just waiting for the right attention, the right care, the right hands. Melanie didn't reach out again. Evan sent one more email, shorter than the last, colder. He said he hoped I was well, said he understood my position, even if he didn't agree with it, and that he and Eliza were figuring things out on their own. There was no warmth in it, no invitation to reconnect, just a polite exit line, like a thank you note from someone returning a gift they never wanted. I didn't respond. I'd said what I needed to say. I didn't need to say it twice. The hardest part wasn't the distance. It was realizing how little they seemed to feel the weight of what had happened. No reconciliation, no real remorse, just forward momentum, as if the problem had been me all along. But even that, in time, became a strange kind of relief. Because once you stop begging for someone's affection, you start noticing the places where real affection lives. I found new rhythms. I made Saturday morning breakfasts for myself, big spreads, like I used to cook for Melanie when she was little. Bacon, pancakes, fresh coffee. I played old records while I ate. Sometimes I'd bring my plate out to the porch and eat in the quiet, letting the sound of the wind and the trees be enough. I stopped trying to capture old memories and started building new ones that didn't rely on anyone else to validate them. I even started writing again. Just little things. Letters to Helen I'd never send. Notes in a journal about the work I did at the nonprofit. Thoughts about legacy and time and forgiveness. It felt good to put things on paper, to see them take shape in ink. Writing helped me realize I hadn't lost everything. I'd just lost an illusion. And in its place, I was building something far more stable. Peace. I updated my will in early spring. Sat across from Mr. Forrester in his office, flipping through legalese with a calm that surprised even me. I restructured the trust entirely. Removed Evan and Melanie as beneficiaries. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I replaced their names with a scholarship fund for trade students, kids who wanted to build things with their hands, who'd be grateful for a chance. I added a clause in bold. Inheritance is not an apology for exclusion. It is a reward for connection, for respect, for love returned in kind. Mr. Forrester looked up at me when we finished. "Are you sure about this, Robert?" he asked. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. And I was. For the first time in years, I wasn't acting out of obligation. I wasn't trying to buy love or secure a place in their future. I was reclaiming my own. As summer came, I took the finished motorcycle out on the road. The wind hit my face like a baptism. The roar of the engine, the smell of warm asphalt, the blur of trees rushing past. It felt like being alive again. Not in the way I'd been for years, waiting quietly on the sidelines, but in the way a man feels when he's stopped asking for permission to matter. I don't know what Melanie tells people now. Maybe that I'm bitter. Maybe that I changed. Maybe that I just couldn't let go of the past. But I know the truth. I didn't change. I simply stopped pretending. I didn't let go of the past. I let go of the version of the future where I was welcome but not wanted. And now, in the stillness of my own life, I finally have room to breathe. If this story resonated with you, and you've ever faced the painful choice between family loyalty and self-respect, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and stories like this remind us that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Stay tuned for more powerful, real-life dramas that speak to the heart. See you soon in the next story.